Amara walked through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, her hand instinctively resting on the heavy, rhythmic kick of her belly. At 8 months pregnant, every step felt like a battle against gravity, a dull ache radiating through her lower back and down her legs. The gray cardigan she wore was soaked through, but she couldn't afford to stop or take a taxi. Her shift at the cafe had ended an hour ago, and the bus fare home was a luxury she chose to skip tonight. Every one saved was a one closer to the hospital fees and the formula her baby would soon need. Life in Korea was supposed to be a quiet sanctuary, a way to disappear after the betrayal she left behind in London. She had traded one kind of chaos for another, moving from a life of being overlooked to a life of being an outsider. Her dark skin drew curious stares and hushed Korean whispers she only half understood, but she held her head high, her long, dark hair clinging to her cheeks. In this city, survival didn't just demand hard work, it demanded invisibility. A soft, scraping sound stopped her near a dark alleyway. Tap, tap, scrape. Amara paused, squinting through the downpour. There, huddled against a cold stone wall, was a small figure in a bright blue hooded raincoat. It was a little girl, no more than 7, clutching a white cane with trembling hands. Her eyes were milky and unfocused, searching the darkness for a landmark she couldn't see. "Hey there," Amara said, her voice dropping into a gentle, maternal hum as she knelt on the wet sidewalk. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" She reached out a hand, unaware that by touching the girl's shoulder, she was reaching into the world of Eun-woo, a world of blood, power, and a debt that could only be paid in loyalty. If you are ready to see how a woman with everything to lose survives the lion's den, please like, subscribe, and comment what part interests you the most. Your support allows us to keep sharing these high-stakes stories. Now let's dive into it. Amara knelt on the rain-slicked pavement, her knees protesting as they hit the cold concrete. The girl, Hana, flinched at the sound of Amara's voice, her small hands tightening around the handle of her white cane. Up close, the child looked even more fragile. Her blue raincoat was splattered with mud, and her face was pale, streaked with a mixture of rainwater and silent tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going to hurt you," Amara whispered, keeping her voice low and melodic. She reached out but stopped herself just inches from the girl's shoulder, remembering that for someone who couldn't see, an unexpected touch could feel like an assault. "My name is Amara. I'm just a neighbor walking home. Are you all alone?" Hana's head tilted, her milky, unfocused eyes searching for the source of the warmth in Amara's tone. I was waiting for Sangmin," she whispered in hesitant Korean. "He was supposed to stay by the door, but there was a loud noise. I followed the sound, and then the rain started and the ground felt different." Amara's heart ached. She placed her hand on her own stomach, feeling a sharp kick from her baby. The maternal instinct that had been simmering for months boiled over into a fierce, protective heat. She knew what it was like to be lost in a place that didn't speak your language, to feel the world shifting under your feet while you searched for a safe place to land. "You're safe now, Hana," Amara said, carefully placing her hand over the girl's trembling fingers. "I'm going to help you. Do you know where you live? Is it nearby?" Hana nodded slowly, her grip on her cane loosening just a fraction. "The big house with the black gates, at the top of the hill. My father says I must never leave the gates without him, but I just wanted to hear the birds." Amara looked up the steep, winding road that led toward the luxury district. It was a long walk, especially in the pouring rain and with the weight of her pregnancy pulling at her spine. Her body screamed for rest, and her small apartment was in the opposite direction. But as Hana reached out and tentatively brushed her small fingers against the sleeve of Amara's damp cardigan, the decision was made. "I'll take you there," Amara promised, helping the girl to her feet. "Hold onto my arm. We'll walk slow, just the two of us." As they began the slow trek up the hill, Amara guided Hana around puddles and uneven stones, shielding the girl from the wind with her own body. She didn't notice the dark sedan idling at the end of the block, or the way the tinted window rolled down just an inch as they passed. She was focused only on the child, unaware that every step she took toward those black gates was a step further away from the life she knew. The trek up the winding hill felt like an eternity. The rain transformed from a light drizzle into a steady, rhythmic drumming that soaked through Amara's cardigan, making the fabric heavy against her skin. Beside her, Hana walked with a surprising grace, her small hand anchored firmly to Amara's forearm. Amara navigated the slick incline with calculated care, her breath coming in shallow hitches as her lower back throbbed with every step. She was focused entirely on the child, whispering soft encouragements in English and broken Korean to keep the girl calm as the city noise faded behind them. The transition was abrupt. The narrow, weathered streets gave way to a secluded, high-walled district where the streetlights glowed with a cold, expensive hum. Finally, they reached the summit. Standing before them were two towering black gates, forged from heavy iron and topped with sharp, defensive spikes. The structure was imposing, a silent sentinel that seemed designed to keep the world at bay. "We're here, Hana," Amara exhaled, her voice trembling slightly from exhaustion. The moment they stepped toward the intercom, the silence of the night shattered. A low, electronic buzz echoed through the air as the gates slid open with mechanical precision. Before Amara could process the movement, the blinding glare of floodlights cut through the darkness, pinning her against the iron bars. Heavy footsteps crunched violently on the gravel. From the shadows of the manicured driveway, 4 men in razor-sharp black suits emerged with military speed. They didn't look like neighborhood security. They moved with a lethal, predatory intent. "Step away from the child," one of them barked in Korean, his hand resting ominously on the holster at his hip. Amara froze, her protective instinct flaring. She didn't pull away. Instead, she instinctively moved her body to shield Hana, her hand tightening on the girl's shoulder. "She was lost," Amara cried out, her voice cracking as the rain lashed her face. "I found her in the city. I'm just trying to help." The guards didn't listen. They fanned out, forming a tight, suffocating circle around her. One man reached out and roughly pulled Hana away. Ignoring the girl's confused cry of no, "Amara." The remaining men closed the distance, their shadows looming over her. Amara felt a cold prickle of terror. She looked at the modern estate behind them, a fortress of glass and steel, and realized she hadn't just walked a lost girl home. She had breached the perimeter of something far more dangerous. As the guards moved to seize her arms, the front doors of the mansion swung open, and a tall, silhouetted figure stepped into the light, radiating an authority that made even the rain seem to hesitate. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 8 months pregnant, exhausted, and now she was a prisoner at the Lion's Gate. The heavy iron gates had felt like a prison entrance, but the bedroom where they held Amara was a different kind of cage, one made of silk, glass, and suffocating silence. She sat on the edge of the sprawling, king-sized bed, her hands trembling as they rested on the high arc of her belly. The room was cold, lit only by the clinical blue glow of the city lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the guards, stony faces, and heard Hana's frightened cries as they separated them. The door clicked open, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. Eun-woo stepped inside. He didn't look like a common criminal. He looked like a king. His black suit was impeccably tailored, and his presence was an overwhelming weight that filled every corner of the room. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked toward her with a slow, predatory grace and stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. His eyes were dark, devoid of warmth, and sharp enough to cut through the lies he clearly expected to hear. "Who sent you?" His voice was a low, dangerous rasp that sent a chill down Amara's spine. I told your men," Amara started, her voice sounding small and fragile in the vast room. "I found her in an alleyway. She was lost and shivering. I only wanted to help her get home." Eun-woo's lip curled into a thin, cynical line. An alleyway in Mapogu, one of the most dangerous sectors for a woman in your condition to be wandering alone. And yet, you just happened to stumble upon the daughter of the head of the Shin HWA syndicate. You expect me to believe in such a convenient miracle. "It wasn't a miracle," Amara snapped, a spark of maternal fire momentarily eclipsing her fear. "It was a child in trouble. I didn't care whose daughter she was. I only saw a little girl who couldn't see the world around her and was terrified of the dark." Eun-woo stepped closer, leaning down until he was eye level with her. The scent of expensive cologne and cold rain drifted off him. My enemies use many masks, Amara Thomas. Some use guns, others use pity. You are a very convincing actress, but if I find even a single thread connecting you to the Lee Syndicate, you will realize that my mercy has very strict limits. Amara didn't flinch. She placed both hands over her unborn child, feeling a frantic flutter of movement within. You can threaten me all you want. You can keep me in this beautiful prison. But my baby hasn't had a drop of water or a bite of food since this afternoon. If you're half the father Hana thinks you are, you'll stop playing at being a monster and remember that there are 2 lives in this room that have nothing to do with your war. For a split second, the icy mask of the Mafia boss flickered. He looked down at her hands, then back at her defiant, tear-streaked face. Without a word, he turned on his heel and strode toward the door. "The kitchen will bring a tray," he said, his hand on the handle. "Stay in this room. If you step into the hallway, my men have orders to treat you as a threat. Do not make me regret my patience." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place with finality. Amara collapsed back against the pillows, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was safe for now, but she knew the interrogation had only just begun. The hours that followed were a blur of cold luxury and quiet dread. Amara had been moved from the interrogation room to a larger suite, but the heavy thud of the deadbolt remained a constant reminder of her status. She sat by the window, watching the rain wash over the sprawling estate, until the sound of a muffled commotion broke the silence of the hallway. There were hurried footsteps, the sharp, frantic voice of a maid, and beneath it all, a high-pitched, jagged sobbing that pulled at Amara's very soul. "No, I want Amara. Where is she?" Hana's voice echoed through the thick walls, raw with a terror that only a child who has lost her anchor can feel. The door to Amara's room flew open. Eun-woo stood there, his jaw tight, his tie loosened for the first time. Behind him, 2 nannies were trying to coax a hysterical Hana into a chair, but the girl was a whirlwind of silk and thrashing limbs. She had knocked her dinner tray to the floor, expensive porcelain lay shattered like sea glass, and rice was scattered across the plush carpet. "She won't eat," Eun-woo said, his voice stripped of its earlier frost, replaced by a weary frustration. "She hasn't slept. She says the house feels too big without your voice." Amara stood up, her hand instinctively supporting the weight of her belly. She didn't wait for permission. She pushed past Eun-woo and knelt, slower this time, beside the trembling girl. "Hana, I'm here. I'm right here, sweetheart." The effect was instantaneous. Hana froze, her breath hitching in her chest as she reached out, her small fingers frantic until they found Amara's hand. She lunged forward, burying her face in Amara's cardigan, her sobs turning into long, shaky exhales of relief. "You didn't go away," the girl whimpered. The dark felt too heavy. Amara looked up at Eun-woo. He was watching them, his arms no longer crossed, his gaze lingering on the way Amara's thumb traced circles on Hana's palm. For a moment, the Mafia boss looked less like a king and more like a man who was failing at the one thing his money couldn't buy, his daughter's peace. "She needs to eat," Amara said firmly, her eyes locking with his. "And she needs to feel safe. I won't stay in a locked room while she's terrified. If you want her to be okay, let us be together." Eun-woo remained silent for a long heartbeat, the power dynamic in the room shifting as tangibly as the tide. Finally, he gave a curt nod to the guards. "Move her things to the East Wing suite next to Hana. Remove the locks. She stays with the child." As the servants scrambled to obey, Eun-woo lingered in the doorway. He watched Amara lift a spoonful of soup to Hana's lips, the 2 of them bathed in the warm light of a bedside lamp. He had brought a stranger into his fortress to protect his secrets, but as he watched Amara's gentle light soothe his daughter's darkness, he realized he had brought in the only thing his empire was missing: a heart. In the days that followed, the east wing of the estate transformed. The clinical, silent halls that once felt like a museum began to hum with a new, domestic rhythm. Amara refused to sit idly by as a passive captive. Despite the heavy weight of her pregnancy, she moved through the rooms with a purposeful grace, opening heavy velvet curtains to let the morning sun spill across the marble floors, and replacing the sterile silence with the soft melodies of the songs her mother had sung to her. Hana bloomed under Amara's care. No longer was the girl confined to her bed, waiting for a schedule determined by distant nannies. Amara taught her to navigate the suite by scent and sound, using the fragrance of fresh jasmine on the side tables and the tactile difference of woven rugs to create a mental map of her world. They spent hours in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, where Amara would describe the colors of the sky or the way the birds danced in the garden, painting a world with words that Hana had long ago forgotten. From the shadows of the mezzanine, Eun-woo watched. He was a man used to order maintained through fear, yet he found himself mesmerized by the order Amara maintained through love. He noticed the small things, the way the kitchen staff now smiled when they delivered trays, the way the tension seemed to bleed out of the air whenever Amara entered a room, and the way his daughter's laughter, a sound he hadn't heard in years, now echoed through the vents. He found excuses to pass by the East Wing more often than his business demanded. He would stand in the doorway, unnoticed, watching Amara guide Hana's small hands over the Braille books he had purchased, but never knew how to introduce. One evening, he found them in the library. Amara was sitting on a low ottoman, her hand resting on her belly while Hana leaned against her, listening to a story. The sight of Amara's dark skin against the ivory upholstery, her face softened by the golden glow of the hearth, hit Eun-woo with the force of a physical blow. "The tea is getting cold," Amara said, not looking up, sensing his presence with the heightened intuition of a woman who had spent her life watching for shadows. Eun-woo stepped into the light, his expression unreadable. "You have changed the energy of this house, Amara. My men report that you are efficient. My daughter reports that you are magic." "I am just a mother, Eun-woo," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. "Something this house has lacked for a very long time." He didn't argue. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't a battleground, but a bridge. He watched the way she cared for his child, and for a fleeting moment, the cold, calculated heart of the Mafia boss felt a spark of something dangerously like hope. The rain returned that night, drumming against the glass of the library with a relentless intensity that mirrored the turmoil in the house. Amara sat near the fireplace, the warmth of the embers soothing the constant ache in her joints. Hana had finally fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, but Eun-woo remained, standing by the window with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The sharp lines of his suit were gone, replaced by a simple black sweater that made him look less like a king and more like a man haunted by ghosts. "She wasn't born blind," he said suddenly, his voice barely rising above the crackle of the fire. Amara looked up, her hand pausing its rhythmic stroking of her belly. She stayed silent, sensing that the weight of the secret had become too heavy for him to carry alone. Eun-woo turned, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "3 years ago, my enemies couldn't reach me, so they reached for my car. My wife Hana's mother was driving. It was a message, a signature of the blood I've spilled to keep this throne." He took a slow, jagged breath. The explosion took her life instantly. Hana survived, but the shards of glass and the trauma, the light just left her eyes that day. Every time I look at her, I see the cost of my ambition. I see the darkness I've forced her to live in. The raw honesty in his confession stripped away the last of Amara's defenses. She saw the monster crumble, revealing a father drowning in guilt and a husband who had never been allowed to grieve. She rose slowly, navigating the space between them until she stood close enough to see the moisture in his eyes. "It wasn't your hand that held the match, Eun-woo," Amara said softly, her voice steady and full of a grace he didn't think he deserved. "You are not the darkness she lives in. To her, you are the only hand that hasn't let go. You've built this fortress to keep her safe, but you've been living in the cellar of your own heart." She reached out, her fingers tentatively brushing his sleeve before moving to rest on his hand. The contact was electric, a bridge spanning the gap between two very different worlds. For a moment, the Mafia boss leaned into her touch, his forehead dropping toward hers. In the quiet of the library, the barriers of status and race vanished. There was only a grieving man and a resilient woman, bound together by a blind girl's love and the shared understanding of what it meant to lose everything. "I can't change the past," Eun-woo whispered against the crown of her head. "But I will burn this city to the ground before I let the shadows touch either of you again." Amara felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold. In his vow, she heard the promise of a protector, but also the warning of the war to come. For the first time, she wasn't just a guest, she was a reason to fight. The fragile peace of the East Wing was shattered 3 days later, not by a storm, but by the clinical precision of a threat. Amara was in the garden with Hana, guiding the girl's hands over the thick, velvety petals of winter camellias, when the estate's perimeter alarm let out a low, morning chime. Within seconds, the tranquil air was filled with the heavy thud of tactical boots. Eun-woo's security team swarmed the courtyard, their faces masked by the shadows of their helmets. Before Amara could ask what was happening, Eun-woo himself appeared. He didn't speak. He simply grabbed her arm with a grip that was desperate rather than dominant and pulled both her and Hana toward the reinforced glass of the sunroom. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice vibrating with a cold, jagged edge. A black drone, small and silent as a predatory insect, hovered just outside the glass. It didn't carry an explosive. Instead, it released a single, heavy object that hit the reinforced pane with a sickening thud before falling to the terrace. It was a gift box, wrapped in elegant white paper, now stained by the damp earth. Eun-woo motioned for his lead strategist to open it. Inside was not a bomb, but a single, charred baby blanket, identical to the one Amara had been knitting in the library, and a photograph. It was a long-range shot of Amara kneeling in the rain beside Hana from the night they met. Across the image, a single word was written in crimson ink: weakness. The air in the room turned to ice. Amara felt a cold wave of nausea roll through her. For the first time, the reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a guest or a caretaker, she was a liability. To Eun-woo's rivals, her pregnancy wasn't a miracle, it was a target. Her unborn child was now a piece on a chessboard she didn't know how to play. "They know," Amara whispered, her hand trembling as she pressed it against her stomach. "They know I'm here. They know about the baby." Eun-woo stood before the glass, his silhouette blocking the view of the world outside. His shoulders were tense, his hands balled into white-knuckled fists. "They think you are a vulnerability I cannot afford to protect," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "They think they can use the life inside you to make me kneel." He turned to face her, and for the first time, Amara saw the monster of Seoul in full bloom. The warmth they had shared by the fire was gone, replaced by a lethal, singular focus. "From this moment, the East Wing is a fortress within a fortress," he declared. "No one enters, no one leaves. The war has moved inside my walls, Amara, and I will burn every bridge to the outside world to keep you both alive." Amara looked at the charred blanket and then at Hana, who was clutching her cane in confused silence. The warning shot had been fired, and the message was clear. Her kindness hadn't just changed her life, it had put a price on it. The transition from uneasy peace to total war happened in the heartbeat between two breaths. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, oppressive silence as the estate's power grid was severed. The hum of the climate control died, and the golden glow of the chandeliers vanished, plunging the East Wing into a thick, suffocating ink. "Hana, stay close," Amara gasped, her voice barely a whisper as she reached through the dark. Her fingers found the girl's trembling shoulder, pulling her tight against the protective curve of her belly. Outside, the night exploded. The rhythmic chatter of automatic gunfire shredded the silence of the gardens, punctuated by the heavy, metallic thud of breaching charges. The fortress within a fortress was under siege. Red emergency lights flickered to life along the baseboards, casting long, bloody shadows against the walls as the estate's secondary systems struggled to engage. "They're here, aren't they?" Hana asked, her voice eerily calm despite the tears leaking from her sightless eyes. She clutched Amara's cardigan, her small knuckles white. "The men who make the loud noises." "I won't let them touch you," Amara promised, though her own heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt a sharp, tightening sensation in her abdomen, a warning cramp that made her stumble. "Not now," she pleaded silently, pressing a hand to her stomach. "Not in the middle of this." The door to the suite burst open, and Eun-woo charged in. He was no longer the polished businessman or the grieving father. He was a specter of violence, a tactical vest strapped over his black sweater, and a submachine gun gripped in his hand. His face was splattered with a fine mist of blood, and his eyes burned with a feral, protective rage. "To the safe room, now!" he roared over the sound of a distant explosion that rocked the floorboards. He didn't wait for them to move. He scooped Hana up in one arm and wrapped the other around Amara's waist, half carrying her as they sprinted through the darkened hallway. Shadows danced wildly as tactical teams exchanged fire in the courtyard below, the muzzle flashes lighting up the windows like strobes. "The perimeter is breached," Eun-woo gritted out, his voice a low growl of frustration. "The Russians and the Lee Syndicate have merged. They aren't here to negotiate, they're here to erase us." As they reached the heavy steel door of the reinforced bunker at the heart of the house, a concussive blast from the floor below sent a shockwave through the air. Amara felt a sudden, warm gush of fluid, and a jagged spike of pain tore through her midsection, stealing her breath. She slumped against the cold metal door, her face draining of color. "Eun-woo," she wheezed, clutching his arm as the world began to spin. "My water, it just broke." Eun-woo's face went deathly pale as he looked from the steel door to the woman in his arms, then back toward the hallway where the sound of boots was growing louder. The siege had reached its breaking point, and Amara was out of time. The heavy steel door of the safe room slammed shut, locking out the world, but it couldn't lock out the pain. Inside the bunker, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and sterilized metal. Red emergency lights pulsed like a dying heartbeat, casting a rhythmic, bloody glow over Amara as she collapsed onto the leather cot. Another contraction ripped through her, a jagged wave of agony that forced a guttural scream from her throat. "Eun-woo, the baby. She's coming now," Amara gasped, her fingers digging into the upholstery until her knuckles turned white. Eun-woo didn't hesitate. He placed Hana in a recessed corner shielded by a heavy oak desk. "Stay here, Hana. Don't move no matter what you hear," he commanded, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. He turned to Amara, his hands, usually so lethal, trembling as he wiped the cold sweat from her brow. But the moment of tenderness was shattered by a thunderous boom. The outer hallway erupted in gunfire. The rival syndicate had reached the door. "I have to hold the line," Eun-woo gritted out, his eyes meeting Amara, with a desperate intensity. He checked his weapon, his silhouette tall and terrifying against the vibrating steel door. "Push, Amara, do not stop. I will not let a single shadow cross this threshold." The scene became a symphony of survival and creation. On one side of the room, Eun-woo stood as a literal shield, his submachine gun barking in short, controlled bursts as assassins tried to breach the reinforced hinges. On the other side, Amara was locked in a different kind of war. With every thunderous kick against the door, she pushed. With every spray of bullets outside, she breathed. Hana sat in the shadows, her hands over her ears, whispering prayers in Korean while Amara's screams of labor mingled with the shouts of dying men in the hall. It was a collision of life and death, the ultimate paradox of the world Eun-woo inhabited. "I see her," Amara cried out, her voice raw and breaking. A final, concussive blast rocked the room, throwing Eun-woo against the door, but he didn't falter. He stood his ground, firing blindly into the smoke of the hallway to keep the killers at bay. In that same instant, a thin, sharp wail pierced through the sound of the gunshots. The silence that followed was deafening. The attackers, hearing the sound of a newborn's cry, seemed to hesitate, stunned by the intrusion of purity into their slaughter. Amara slumped back, her chest heaving as she clutched a tiny, squirming life against her damp skin. Eun-woo turned, his face splattered with soot and blood, looking at the woman and the child. The monster of Seoul dropped his weapon, falling to his knees as the first light of dawn began to creep through the bunker's high vents. In the wreckage of the siege, a new life had been claimed, and a father had finally found something worth more than his empire. The smoke from the siege had barely cleared when the estate was flooded with reinforcements, not the faceless soldiers of a Mafia king, but a cleanup crew moving with a new, somber efficiency. The air in the sunroom was finally still, the morning light filtering through the bullet-scarred windows to dance over the bassinet. Amara sat in a plush velvet armchair, her newborn daughter wrapped in a soft, cream-colored blanket. Her body was exhausted, but her eyes held a clarity that made the battle-hardened guards look away. Eun-woo entered the room, the blood washed from his face, but the weight of the night still visible in the set of his shoulders. He approached her, his gaze softening as it landed on the sleeping infant. He reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, but Amara didn't pull back. Instead, she waited until his eyes met hers. "The men who did this are being dealt with," Eun-woo said, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "I have tripled the perimeter security. You and the children will never be in the dark again." Amara adjusted the baby against her chest, her expression unwavering. "Triple the guards if you must, Eun-woo, but the rules of this house have changed. I am not a guest, and I am certainly not another piece of property to be protected by iron gates." Eun-woo paused, his hand hovering near the bassinet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if I am to stay, I am not staying as a captive," Amara said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Hana needs more than a fortress. She needs a world where she isn't a target because of her father's shadow, and my daughter will not grow up in a house built on fear." She stood up slowly, the movement demanding respect. "From now on, you don't keep secrets from me. If there is a threat, I hear of it first. If there is a decision regarding the safety of this family, it is made together. I am the mother of your house now, Eun-woo. I've seen the worst your world has to offer, and I didn't flinch. If you want me by your side, you treat me as an equal." Eun-woo looked at her, this woman who had walked his daughter home through the rain and birthed a child amidst a gunfight. He realized then that the weakness his enemies tried to exploit was actually the strongest foundation his empire had ever known. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of submission he had never shown to any rival. "The kingdom is yours, Amara," he whispered. Amara looked out at the garden, where Hana was being led safely toward them. She smiled, feeling the weight of the baby in her arms and the man at her side. Her kindness hadn't doomed her, it had crowned her. Together, they weren't just a syndicate, they were a family. And in Amara's kingdom, love was the only law that mattered. Thanks for watching, and remember to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss interesting stories like this. See you in the next story.